The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock, each second dragging the tension tighter. Judge William Carter sat high on the bench, his face unreadable as he prepared to deliver the final ruling. This wasn't just another custody battle. It was the most talked about case in town, drawing reporters, legal experts, and curious onlookers. On one side, Olivia Harper sat rigid, her fingers tightly woven together on the table. Once known as a devoted mother, she had been painted as reckless and unfit by her ex-husband's legal team. Across from her, Daniel Reeves adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit. For months, he had fought to gain full custody of their son, claiming Olivia was incapable of providing a stable home. His lawyer had crafted a flawless image: Daniel, the responsible, loving father. But beneath his carefully constructed facade, there was something else. A stiffness in his jaw, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Judge Carter raised his gavel, after reviewing all testimonies and evidence presented. And then, "Wait!" The small voice sliced through the tension like a blade. Every head turned. Standing at the back of the courtroom was a boy no older than 10. His fists clenched, his face flushed with a raw, desperate urgency. His name was Ethan Reeves, the child at the heart of this bitter war. The air grew thick. Olivia's breath hitched. Daniel's fingers curled into a fist on the table. Even Judge Carter, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, hesitated before speaking. "Step forward, son." Ethan swallowed hard and took a step. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, the only sound in a room frozen in anticipation. No one could have predicted what would come next. What Ethan was about to say would shake the courtroom to its core. Before we continue, tell us, what do you think is going to happen next? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you're hooked, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let's dive into the truth that left the judge completely stunned. Ethan's small frame seemed even smaller under the weight of every pair of eyes locked onto him. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his hands trembling slightly at his sides, but his voice, though not loud, was steady. "They lied," he said. A ripple of murmurs spread across the courtroom. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the table. Daniel's body tensed, his expression darkening. Judge Carter adjusted his glasses. Lied about what? Ethan's eyes darted between his parents. His mother, frozen in shock, and his father, a mask of barely restrained anger. He hesitated, his fingers gripping the hem of his slightly oversized sweater. For a moment, he looked just like what he was, a scared kid caught in the middle of a war that wasn't his. But then, as if something inside him snapped into place, his shoulders straightened. The fights, the stories they told about each other, they're not true. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The attorneys exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene. They both wanted to win so badly that they made things up. Ethan continued, his voice cracking but unwavering. "But they forgot about me." The words landed like a sledgehammer, a sharp intake of breath from Olivia, a subtle twitch in Daniel's jaw. The judge leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping against the wooden bench. "Go on," he urged. Ethan's gaze flickered toward his father, then back at the judge, his fingers curled into fists. "They told you everything about each other," he said, his voice rising just a fraction. "But nobody asked me what really happened. Nobody asked me what I wanted." A silence heavier than before settled over the room. The weight of his words pressed down on everyone like a held breath. And yet, this was only the beginning. The courtroom felt smaller, the walls closing in as Ethan's words hung in the air. No one dared to move. Even Judge Carter, a man who had seen countless custody battles, remained still, his sharp gaze locked onto the boy standing before him. Ethan took a shaky breath, his fingers tightening around the fabric of his sweater. Then, he spoke again. "Dad said Mom doesn't take care of me, that she forgets about me." His voice wavered, but his resolve did not. He turned his head slightly toward Olivia, his expression softening. But that's not true. A choked gasp escaped Olivia's lips. Her hands trembled as she brought them to her mouth. "She's the one who stays up with me when I have nightmares," Ethan continued, his voice stronger now. "She's the one who makes me soup when I'm sick. She's the one who helps me with my homework when I don't understand." His throat tightened, but he pushed forward. "She doesn't forget me." Ethan turned then, his eyes burning as they met his father's. "But he does." A stunned silence. Daniel's fingers curled into a fist against the table. His expression darkened, but for the first time, a flicker of something else crossed his face. Fear. "Ethan!" he warned, his voice dangerously low. But Ethan wasn't finished. His voice rose, raw with frustration. "You said you'd pick me up from school last month, but you never came," he accused. "Mom had to leave work early to get me. And you promised you'd come to my soccer game, but you were too busy with—" He stopped short, uncertainty flashing across his face. Judge Carter leaned in. "Too busy with what, Ethan?" Ethan hesitated, his small hands clenching at his sides. Then, in a single breath, he let it out. "Your girlfriend." The words cut through the room like a knife. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Olivia's face twisted in disbelief, her lips parting in silent betrayal. The attorneys whispered furiously among themselves. Even the bailiff, who had remained expressionless throughout the hearing, raised an eyebrow. Daniel let out a forced, hollow laugh. He shook his head, but there was no confidence left in his voice. "This is ridiculous. He's just a kid. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But Ethan wasn't backing down. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I saw you," he said, his voice slicing through his father's feeble defense like a blade. "You were supposed to be with me, but you were with her." Daniel's mouth snapped shut. The courtroom was no longer just a place of legal arguments and carefully constructed lies. It had become something else, a battlefield where truth clashed against deception, and for the first time, deception was losing. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Daniel sat frozen, his face drained of color, his carefully crafted image crumbling before an audience that now saw him for who he truly was. Judge Carter's fingers tapped against the bench. His voice was measured but firm. "Ethan, I need you to be very clear. Are you saying your father has not been present in your life as much as he claims?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He nodded, his voice steady. "He says he wants me, but he only fights for me in here." He gestured around the courtroom before his hands dropped back to his sides. His next words came softer, but they carried more weight than anything said in that room so far. "Not at home, not where it matters." A heavy silence, the kind that forces people to confront uncomfortable truths. Daniel's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly improper. The child wasn't sworn in. His testimony is unverified and—" Judge Carter raised a hand. The attorney fell silent. "I will determine relevance, counselor." His eyes never left Ethan. "Son, is there anything else you need to tell us?" Ethan shifted on his feet. His gaze flickered toward his mother, who sat motionless, barely breathing. Then, toward his father, whose face was twisted into something unreadable. Anger, panic, shame. And then, Ethan spoke the words that would break everything apart. "My dad didn't just lie about my mom," he said quietly. "He lied about me." Olivia's head snapped up. Daniel's entire body went rigid. The room, already thick with tension, seemed to collapse in on itself. Judge Carter's expression changed, just slightly. "Go on." Ethan inhaled sharply, like he was bracing for impact. His voice trembled, but he refused to stop. "He told you I wanted to live with him." A pause, a heartbeat of silence before. "That's not true." The words landed like an earthquake. Daniel's chair scraped against the floor as he lurched forward. "That's a lie," he barked. Ethan flinched. Olivia gasped, reaching instinctively toward her son. Judge Carter's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Sit down, Mr. Reeves." Daniel's breath came fast and shallow, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. But he obeyed. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice shaking but determined as he continued. "He told me to say it. He said, if I told you I wanted to stay with him, everything would be easier." His lips trembled, but he pushed forward. "He said I wouldn't have to hear them fighting anymore, that I wouldn't have to see Mom cry." A strangled sob escaped Olivia's lips. Ethan clenched his fists. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the courtroom like thunder. "He said, if I didn't do what he asked, I'd never see my mom again." The reaction was instant. Gasps, shocked murmurs. Even Daniel's own lawyer looked unsettled. Judge Carter's voice was like steel. "Mr. Reeves, do you have a response to this?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing. The courtroom was watching his downfall in real time. His confidence had shattered, leaving only a man who had been caught. And now, we have to ask, what would you do in this situation? Would you forgive someone who manipulated their own child? Let us know in the comments. And if this moment had you holding your breath, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that prove the truth always finds its way out. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in, the tension thick enough to choke. Daniel Reeves sat motionless, his face pale, his breath unsteady. For months, he had fought to craft the perfect narrative, the devoted father battling for his son's well-being. But now, that image was shattered. Judge Carter's gaze bore into him. "Mr. Reeves, did you instruct your son to lie to this court?" Daniel's jaw clenched, his fingers curled into fists against the table. For a split second, it looked like he might double down, insist. Ethan was confused, a child too young to understand the complexities of custody battles. But then, he glanced at his lawyer. The man was rubbing his temple, his grip on his pen tight, his expression screaming one thing: "There's no way out." Daniel exhaled shakily. His voice was barely above a whisper. I may have said some things to him." Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes burned with betrayal. "Not some things." His voice was louder now, filled with a raw, cutting anger that no 10-year-old should ever have to carry. "You made me feel like I had no choice." His lip quivered, but his words didn't stop. "You told me I had to pick you, that Mom didn't deserve me." He swallowed hard, his fists tightening. "You made me lie about her, and I hated it. I hated it every time." Daniel's face twisted. Regret, shame, anger, maybe all three. But no words came out. Judge Carter's expression darkened. He turned toward Daniel's lawyer. "Counselor, I hope you are prepared to explain why your client's sworn testimony may have been fabricated." The attorney hesitated. His voice was carefully measured, but there was an unmistakable edge of defeat beneath it. "Your Honor, in light of this testimony, I would advise my client to exercise his Fifth Amendment rights until further discussion." A quiet, shaking breath escaped Olivia's lips. She turned to Ethan, her eyes glistening with a mixture of love and sorrow, a mother's heartbreak at realizing her child had carried a burden too heavy for his small shoulders. But Judge Carter wasn't finished. He looked back at Ethan, his voice softer now. "Son, you said your father lied about what you wanted. So I'll ask you now." He leaned forward slightly. "What do you want?" Ethan didn't even have to think about it. He turned, walked straight to his mother's table, and without hesitation, grabbed her hand. "I want to stay with Mom." A choked sob broke from Olivia's lips. She wrapped her arms around her son, holding him tightly, as if she could shield him from everything he had just been through. Daniel looked down at the table, defeated. His lawyer had his head in his hands. Judge Carter exhaled slowly. The decision was all but made. But just when it seemed like everything had reached its climax, another twist sent the entire courtroom into shock. The weight of Ethan's words still lingered in the air, pressing down on every person in the courtroom. Olivia clung to her son, her silent tears soaking into his hair, while Daniel sat frozen, his world crumbling piece by piece. Judge Carter turned back to him, his voice steady, unyielding. "Mr. Reeves, based on your son's testimony and your own admission, this court must reconsider whether you are fit for joint custody at all." Daniel's head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. "No, no, Your Honor, please." His voice cracked with desperation. "He's just a kid. He doesn't know what he's saying." Ethan flinched at the outburst, pressing closer to his mother. Olivia instinctively shielded him, her hand tightening around his. Judge Carter's expression remained cold, unmoved. "Are you implying your son, your own son, lied just now?" Daniel opened his mouth, then hesitated. His face twisted, his jaw tightening, but he had no defense left. No more lies to spin. "You manipulated your child, Mr. Reeves," the judge continued, his voice heavy with authority. "You weaponized him against his mother. And if this court cannot trust you to put your son's well-being before your own ego, then you leave me with very little choice." Daniel's hands trembled as he gripped the table. His lawyer didn't even try to intervene. The battle was lost. Then, a voice broke through the tension. "I have proof." Every head turned. Olivia's lawyer, who had remained mostly silent throughout Ethan's testimony, now stood with a folder in hand. Daniel's entire body went rigid. His lawyer tensed. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed. "Go on." The attorney stepped forward, flipping open the folder. "Your Honor, during our private investigation, we retrieved text messages between Mr. Reeves and his son. Messages that further support Ethan's claims of coercion." A stunned hush spread across the room. Daniel's face went deathly pale. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath. Ethan didn't move, his small fingers digging into his mother's sleeve. Judge Carter gestured for the documents. The lawyer handed them over. And as the judge's eyes scanned the pages, his expression darkened. Daniel's lawyer was already rubbing his temples, muttering something under his breath. There was no spinning this, no saving it. The judge finally set the papers down, drumming his fingers against the bench. His tone was final. "This changes everything." Daniel dropped his head into his hands, and with that, the courtroom braced for the final ruling. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was deafening. Judge Carter let the weight of the moment settle before lifting his gaze toward Daniel. His voice was steady, unwavering. "Effective immediately, primary custody will be awarded to Ms. Harper," he declared. "Mr. Reeves, you will have supervised visitation until this court determines that you are fit to be alone with your son." A strangled noise escaped Daniel's throat. He shot up from his seat, his desperation now raw, unfiltered. "No, you can't do this. He's my son." Judge Carter's gavel came down hard. "Sit down." Daniel's breath was ragged, his entire body trembling. He turned, searching for something, anything that could save him. His lawyer refused to meet his gaze. Olivia was holding Ethan tightly, shielding him from the chaos. And then, for the first time, Daniel looked at his son. Ethan met his father's eyes. No fear, no hesitation, just the undeniable truth. And in that moment, Daniel knew he hadn't just lost a case. He had lost the one thing he claimed to be fighting for. The court is adjourned. The final echo of the gavel signaled the end. The reporters scribbled furiously. Spectators whispered in shock, but Olivia didn't care about any of it. She turned to Ethan, brushing the hair from his face. "We're okay now," she whispered. "We're okay." Ethan nodded, but his voice was barely above a whisper. "Are we really?" Olivia blinked, her throat tightening. She cupped his face, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "Yes, baby, we really are." They stood together as the courtroom emptied. Daniel sat motionless, his lawyer mumbling something beside him. But he wasn't listening. He could only watch as Olivia and Ethan walked away, without looking back. Because in the end, the truth had found its way out. It always did. What do you think? Did justice prevail? Let us know in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. And remember, no matter how deep a lie is buried, the truth will always rise.